Greetings to all. Welcome to the Self-Knowledge course. Today we will be talking about ego, personality and essence. The objective of this topic is to teach us to differentiate the activity of each of these aspects of our psychology. To learn to observe and distinguish in each of our acts when the ego manifests itself, when the essence, and when the personality, so that we learn to identify them at the moment of self-observation. To understand each of these aspects, we are going to analyze them separately. But before, let's see what are the different acts that exist, since there are three types of acts. The first are the acts of the ego, or recurrences. These happen because we are not aware of our inner world, and therefore we are constantly letting our psychological defects, or ego manifest, instead of our consciousness. These acts are repeated over and over again, also generating that over and over again, we have to suffer their consequences, which tend to be greater each time, since the ego grows each time that it manifests itself again. As we saw in the conference in which we talked about the law of recurrence, our ego makes us repeat the same acts, do the same things, make the same decisions, make the same mistakes existence after existence. These are the acts of the ego, which keep us in that mechanical repetition day after day. We also saw in that conference that thanks to this, we reached a new existence with a marked destiny, where everything we are going to experience is already written, everything that is going to happen to us, and how we are going to react. Since we are constantly driven by the ego, we can only act under its mechanical conditioning. But there is also a second type of acts. These are the accidents. Accidents happen to us because our consciousness is asleep, because we are distracted and fascinated. These are acts that are not on our fate line. For example, it may not be in our line of fate that we get hit by a car at the age of 25. But since in this existence we create the defect that all the time is entertained with the cell phone, that we even walk looking at the cell phone. We cross a street without caution, and someone accidentally runs us over. These types of acts are the ones that cause new recurrences. Since, for example, in the case that I am using to illustrate this, with this accident, a new recurrence is generated, and for the next existence, at the same age, we will already be so absorbed with a cell phone or another technology, perhaps more advanced, but the defect will be the same, and will cause the same recurring action, with the same consequence. But there is also a third type of acts, and these are the conscious acts. These are the acts that will prevent accidents, therefore, they will prevent new recurrences from occurring, and they are the ones that will allow us to get out of the ego mechanics, and free ourselves from the recurrences that we bring from the past and their consequences. For conscious acts to take place, we must be making conscious efforts to awaken our consciousness at every moment. Let's now see in detail the ego, the personality, and the essence, so that we can deepen our understanding of these aspects. What is the ego? The ego is known by different names. Several of these we may have heard of, but perhaps we have not realized that they all refer to the same thing, the ego in us. For example, the ego is known as I's or selves, that is that multiplicity that we are internally. Each of our different ways of being, which we can observe manifesting within us at all times, the moody self, the flirtatious, the impatient, the distracted, the optimistic, the lazy, the envious, the coward, the tyrannical self, etc. These are our ego. These in Buddhism are known as the psychological aggregates. But also, the ego is known as psychological defects, or errors, each one of those defects or defective forms that we can find in ourselves, and that as defects, lead us to act incorrectly, causing harm to others and ourselves. They are also known as desires and temptations, those that we constantly feel and that lead us to give in to our lowest instincts, and of which we constantly want to blame an external entity, a Satan or external demon. But when we are able to understand that what we call God and the devil do not reside elsewhere, but within ourselves, then we understand that this devil, Satan, or the red demons of Seth, as they were known in ancient Egypt, are no more than the ego that lives within each one of us. In Christianity they are called sins, and we know the 7 deadly sins: laziness, greed, lust, pride, anger, gluttony, and envy. And these are nothing more than the 7 main heads of the legion, that is our ego. But the ego is also known as injustice, ignorance, pain, and suffering, since it is the ego that causes us to act unfairly, the one that prevents us from coming out of ignorance towards the light. And it is the ego that causes us to experience pain and constantly suffering. It is also known as inner darkness, trapped consciousness, and each of our mental concepts. All these are names that receive what is the ego or psychological I. In short, the ego is everything that manifests itself in us, and that leads us to make mistakes, to harm others and ourselves, like hatred, resentment, impatience, vanity, selfishness, envy, violence, lies, betrayal, vices, sentimentality, attachments, fears, concepts, beliefs, etc., that manifest in us moment by moment. All of this is part of our ego, and it is what has our consciousness trapped and conditioned. If we do not get rid of the ego, we will never develop our consciousness. It is important to know that the psychological selves were born from all the impressions that we receive from the external world, and that we did not transform correctly in any of our existences. Every time we were faced with a given situation, and we were fascinated, we identified ourselves. That energy that we put into it is what creates each one of ourselves. And these, with the passage of time and each one of our existences, have been strengthening, since ourselves grow each time that, due to a lack of self-observation or self-awareness, we allow them to manifest in us and feed on the energy from our centers. The psychological I has a molecular nature. It belongs to the 5th dimension, which is the world to which our emotions and thoughts belong. That is why in the physical world it is not possible to see an emotion or a thought, although no one can doubt its reality. Likewise, no one can physically see the ego when it manifests from the 5th dimension through desire and justification, but from there, it takes over our personality, and through the personality it takes over our physical body, leading us to act based onto the conditioning of the self that is manifesting and leading us to generate karma. Each I has its own personality. Each one of them has their particular way of being. We can see that our angry selves manifest a very different personality than our happy self, or than our fearful, or than our lustful self. Something else that we must understand about the ego is that there are new eyes and old eyes. In these last existences, we have created many selves that we did not have before. For example, in other existences, we did not have the ego of the telephone or of the cell phone. That self that feeds on all the energy we give it by spending hours and hours on those devices, until we become addicted, and that makes us feel anxious if we leave our cell phone, and that makes us suffer terribly if we lose it. But also, in this existence, we have created selves like the driver, the gamer, the one who watches pornography, the one on social networks, etc. We see how all this supposed advance that we see in technology makes us have the illusion that we are evolving, when internally, it is actually precipitating us into involution. Because if we reflect on it, we will realize that these advances have served to degenerate us more and more, and with these new selves to feed all our old selves even more. Because we also have very old psychological eyes. We can see, for example, the eye of laziness that is the father of them all. We can see among the details of the lazy ego, very old egos such as the partying self, the funny self, the bored self, the disobedient self, the distracted self, etc. And if we analyze it, we see how the new selves end up feeding the old selves. We could give the example of the eye that play video games, and we can see how this not only feeds many very old eyes of laziness, such as leisure and distraction, but they also come to feed murderous selves, vengeful selves, cruel selves, thieves, etc. Since in this virtual reality we do everything freely, indirectly feeding, many times, the heavier selves of our psychology, which perhaps due to our current personality no longer manifest directly. And it is that the ego evolves. Even in a single life, we can verify the evolution of an ego. We can speak, for example, of lust. The first time that lust manifested itself in us in this existence, it was probably just leering at people of the opposite sex, the lascivious self, then it evolves and the self that watches porn appears, then the self that masturbates, then the self that fornicates with a partner, but then not only vaginal fornication, but also oral sex, then anal sex, can even in the same existence pass into the homosexual self, the celibate self, the pedophile, etc. The self always evolves in its degeneration, and in each existence its molecular weight increases, and its force of manifestation becomes greater, if we never decide to work on them and eradicate them from our psychology. But it is important to know that all the egos can be eliminated. And for this, it is necessary to be constantly vigilant, in a constant state of self-observation, to discover them manifesting as desires, in our emotions, in our minds, in our words, actions, and omissions. Observe what it does, why it does it, when it does it, and thus, from moment to moment, understand that these are egoic manifestations, and ask our particular Divine Mother to eliminate them from our psychology. This procedure is called psychological death, and it is the way in which we will free ourselves from the ego, and will allow us to free the essence, and release the energy that will serve as raw material to create ourselves internally, and achieve the second birth. If we don't decide to work on ourselves in the elimination of the ego, then, when our existences, as humans run out, we will have to go through the involution process that we studied in Lesson 8. And there, in involution, all the selves will die painfully and involuntarily. And from this process, which can take thousands of years, our essence will come out clean, but without having been able to rescue the wisdom of that turn in the wheel of samsara. From there, the innocent essence will come out ready to be connected again to the wheel to turn one more time. It is very important to understand the need to eliminate the ego in one existence as humans, to free ourselves. The ego makes us make many mistakes, exhausts our energy, causes all kinds of recurrences, keeps us repeating the same situations over and over again, and prevents us from advancing towards our inner being. Each self brings with it karmic accounts to collect and to pay. If we don't work on ourselves, we will keep repeating the lessons over and over again, without being able to learn from them, and to transcend those hard situations. To observe the manifestations of the ego in us, we must learn to observe the different desires we feel during the day to discover the self that causes that desire, and understand that part of our consciousness is trapped in that defect. And we feel all kinds of desires during the day, the desire to drink, the desire to fight, the desire to do nothing, the desire to masturbate, the desire to criticize, etc. If we learn to deny ourselves to the constant desires of the ego, we will stop being slaves of desire, and we will rescue light that is wisdom, and fire that is love and encouragement, which is the ability to do in pursuit of consciousness. Now that we already know what the ego is, let's see what the personality is. The personality is the energetic vehicle that will allow our psychological defects to manifest in us. When a baby is born, he does not have a created personality, he does not have a way of being, he simply is. And because of that, psychological defects still can't manifest in him, that's why the baby enjoys that particular beauty. In the baby only the 3% of free consciousness is expressing itself. But as the child grows, he starts creating his personality, and then he is already forming a way of being. Until approximately at 7 years of age, he has completely created a personality, which from now on will be strengthened for rest of his life. Through the personality all the selves can openly enter the person. Personality is born in time and dies in time. There is no future for personality. It is formed in each existence so that the selves manifest in the physical body. In each new existence we create a new personality, and with the death of the physical body, also comes the death of that personality. Personality is formed through imitation. What children see children do. The child observes and is like a sponge that absorbs everything he sees around him, and imitates what he sees his parents, siblings, friends, and others doing. The child begins to imitate the accent, the gestures, but also begins to imitate the reactions of others, and begins to have a concept of what is right and what is wrong. If he sees, for example, that the mother yells all the time, gets angry, reacts violently, then, the child internalizes this, and then repeats it, according to the electropsychic design that he brings. If he sees that his father strives all the time for getting money, and that rejects people who don't have money, then the child begins to assume that not having money is wrong and something to be ashamed of. And so, he grows and imitates his school friends, his acquaintances, and other relatives. He imitates what he sees on television, on the internet, etc., and he creates his personality, or his way of being. The child begins to develop new concepts with which he identifies himself. These things form the "I am like this." And from then on, he begins to worship the personality. From there he begins to say, the best music is the one I listen to, or the best country is mine, or the football match I like is the best, or the religion I practice is the true one, and a lot of other concepts that are defended to the death, because he feels that by defending these concepts he is defending himself. Because when we become fascinated with personality, we lost the connection with our own spirit, with our own consciousness, and we become totally identified and defined by our personality. And we begin to be very conditioned by what others will say. You can see that we do things, we behave in a certain way, we show that facade, that mask, which is personality, in order to have a reputation, so that the best of us is said, so that we are held in high esteem, or out of fear of criticism and rejection. With each physical body we create a new facade, a new personality, with a new name, surname, education, economic position, culture, tastes, interests, customs, habits, etc. Our personality is made up of all these elements related to culture, the social and economic level of the place where we were born, and the family in which we were born. But this personality has multiple fractions, it has many ways of being, since each psychological self has its own personality. We may notice that the aspect of personality that emerges when one is happy is totally different from the one expressed when one is sad, bored, angry, or scared. Our personality today is just a servant at the service of the ego. And the problem with personality is that it keeps us hypnotized, thinking that the things of the world, vanity, money, prestige, luxuries, professions, business, appearances, etc., are the important things in life. If from childhood they made us see that the important thing was money, the child grows up fascinated with the things of money, and with the ways of making money, and that is what he will base his life on. Or if you've been taught that the important thing in life is family, you grow up fascinated by the family things. Or if you were taught that the important thing in life is to stand out, you spend your whole life looking for how to stand out from others, and these things fascinate you and you forget what is really important, the reason why we are here, which is the development of our consciousness. This is how we waste all our time pursuing vain goals. That is why it is good to know that there are two types of personality. One is the active personality, which is the one most of us have. That is the one that is at the service of the ego. For example, if our lust wants to manifest, the personality will look for a way to make lust manifest in an appropriate way. Like when we see someone who is attractive to us, and lust wants to go directly to copulate with that person. But what the personality do is to find a way to talk to that person, seduce him, promise him love, fidelity, and who knows how many other things. Behind which the egoic intention of going to copulate with that person is hidden. Thus, the active personality helps each psychological I, so that they can manifest themselves. But there is another personality, which is the one we must develop, and that is the passive personality. And this begins to develop when the person learns not to be so reactionary and learns not to immediately do what the defect wants, but to reflect. When a desire manifests, it judges that desire. For example, if someone offers you a shady business, in which you are going to earn a lot of money, but instead of reacting, and immediately say yes, because of your greedy self, or say no, because of what other would say, or because of how people will treat you if they catch you doing this kind of thing. You observe yourself, you reflect, you observe the defect that is manifesting itself in your mind in the form of justifications, in your emotion as fear or anguish, in your body as tension, anxiety, etc. And you realize that they are manifestations of your thief self, and you eliminate it. Then consciousness can manifest in you, and you will be able to act in that situation in a conscious way. This is how you begin to develop that state of receptivity. If we stop being so reactionary, we are making way for the essence to manifest itself, and it will always give us the precise and conscious answer. Now, what is the essence? The essence is the true, real, and immortal in each one of us, and it is the only thing that is truly worth something. It has been the same since the moment we left the sacred absolute sun. It is who we really are, outside of the ego and the personality. And contrary to the ego and the personality, the essence does not belong to time, nor does it die in time, but is eternal and permanent. It is not conditioned by what others say or think, but will always act consciously, based on what is fair, useful, and true. It will always seek the awakening of all our consciousness. 100% of our essence is immortal, but it is divided into two parts. A 3% free and self-conscious essence, and a 97% of essence that is trapped in each one of our psychological defects. When the essence is free, it is called consciousness, because it has wisdom, and it is called essence when it is trapped because essence comes from innocence. And precisely because of its innocence, it was trapped by the ego with the purpose of acquiring experience from which to draw wisdom. The work that we must do is, first, to awaken that 3% because we have it asleep, and then, go on releasing, with psychological death, the trapped essence and make it conscious. That is the reason for existing. When we were little, and the personality had not yet been formed, that 3% of consciousness was still awake, but when we reached the age of 7, when we already had the use of reason, that 3% fell asleep, and only in a few cases we will hear again the voice of consciousness. Now, what we have to do is seek to awaken that consciousness, and we are going to awaken and develop it, through the practice of the 3 factors of the revolution of consciousness. Because what is the essence looking for? Against the desire of the ego and the personality, the essence will always seek to release all essences through the practice of psychological death. To merge them to the 3%, through spiritual birth, through the practice of suprasex. And is going to seek that the other brothers of humanity also wake up, by consciously sacrificing time and effort for them, offering them the teaching of the 3 factors in a disinterested way. That is the whole objective and work of our being. And if we give value to that work, we will be able to develop our spiritual part, we will be able to know ourselves and self-realize our being. Now let's see how to differentiate the ego, the personality, and the essence. It is very important that we learn to differentiate this, and I am going to give you an example, so that you learn to differentiate when each one acts. Let's say we go down a street and we meet someone we didn't want to see, because we owe him money. How does our ego manifest itself in that situation? The ego is all that reaction that arises within us, the desire to hide, the anger for having found that person, the hatred that it generates in us, the shame, the desire to lie, all this is the manifestation of the ego in this situation. How does personality manifest? It's the facade we put on, when even feeling all this, we smile at him, greet him politely, ask about his family, with a feeling of horrible annoyance inside, but we put on a pleasant face. And when he asks us about the money we owe him, then we start lying and making a whole movie about why we haven't paid him yet. And how could the essence manifest itself in that situation? For the essence, which is what is real in us, which is wisdom and love, to manifest, we need to be in self-observation to discover all those psychological defects that are manifesting through emotion, in the mind, and through the personality making us act, or speak in this or that way. Only by eliminating everything that is false in us can what is real manifest itself, rescuing from that situation a lot of consciousness, and a lot of wisdom, and therefore, the essence will lead us to act in this situation without conditioning, neither from the ego nor from the personality. We will act consciously. It cannot be pigeonholed in a concept how the essence would act, since the essence being the real and the true, is the unknown from moment to moment. And only when we find ourselves in a specific situation, and eliminating all the manifestations of the ego, will we discover what will be the conscious action that will arise spontaneously. Because consciousness is not mechanical, consciousness cannot be measured or conceptualized, nor can it be enclosed in a moral book, since what is conscious in one situation, and under certain circumstances, is not so in others. Consciousness arises spontaneously, and is beyond good and evil. It remains for us to put this into practice, through self-observation, to learn to identify the actor in each of our acts. And this has been the topic of today. In the next topic, we will already be talking more deeply about self-observation. We will learn everything about this important practice that will allow us to make radical changes in our psychology. See you at the next conference.